right, friends. Well, we are on week 6 in our series, going through and looking at the 7 churches in the book of Revelation. And today we're going to be diving in and looking at the church of Philadelphia. No, not Philadelphia in the United States, but the church or the city and church of Philadelphia over in Asia Minor, in what is modern-day Turkey. And so, if you have your Bibles, I encourage you to flip to Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 through 13. Now, as we begin this, or if you're just joining us for the first time, the purpose of this series is for us to really look at what Jesus is saying to the historical churches of the day, but also for us to look and see how these messages and letters are relevant for us in our personal lives as well as in the lives of our church. So I'll again flip you to the map, and as you can see, Philadelphia is a little bit to the south and east of Sardis. It's about 30 miles away, and we talked about Sardis last week. The name, obviously, Philadelphia means the city of brotherly love or familial love. And this city, back in ancient times, held a very strategic and prominent position, and it served as sort of this hub of communication between the east and the west, between Sardis and Pergamum, and then between Laodicea and Hierapolis, which is not on the map, but it sort of bridged the gap between this east-west thing, and so it held a very strategic location. The church, or the city of Philadelphia in modern Turkey, the ancient city, also served as sort of this hub for Greek culture and Greek language. We might even have kind of called it like a missionary city, right? This city that was to go out and to take Greek language and culture to all of Asia Minor and the world beyond, okay? So I'm going to invite you to keep that in the back of your mind, because there's going to be a very close parallel between the city function and one of the functions of the church. And then finally, friends, the city of Philadelphia was largely an agricultural city. It did very well with textiles and other things, and so there was an amount of wealth that came in through those things, okay? So there's a little bit of historical context about the city. So let's go in and let's then look at what Jesus says to each, or says to the church that is in this city. You guys might read it. There we go. All right. So here the glorified Christ is speaking to John, the author of Revelation, and he says, "To the angel of the church in Philadelphia write, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have a little strength, yet you have kept my word, and you have not denied my name." All right. Well, friends, each and every week we've started by looking at the very beginning at the description and characteristics of Jesus. And here he says, these are the words of the one who is holy and true, and the one who holds the key of David. And each week we've seen that there's been a lot of relevance in this depiction and in how Jesus interacts with this specific church. Okay? Now, before we get too far into this, I just want to say that the church in Philadelphia, in some ways, is kind of a breath of fresh air for us, right? Because we just spent the last 3 weeks looking at churches that were in decline. We looked at what we call the compromising church, the sick church, and then the dead church. And so we reach Philadelphia, and it kind of gives us this breath of this breath of fresh air, and we are going to look, because it's only the second church out of the 7 that doesn't receive a rebuke from Jesus. Okay? So all of the words that Jesus has to speak are powerful and encouraging to the church of Philadelphia for what they're doing. And so he says, look, I am the one who is holy and true, and I hold the key of David. And so again, it's important to remember that the words holy and true aren't just additions to the person of Jesus Christ, but they're implicit to his very being. Right? We know that no one but God is absolutely holy, and Jesus Christ, as a member of the Godhead, of the Trinity, is also perfectly holy. We understand that his words, the things that he says to the church, is true. And then later in these verses he says, look, you have kept to my word, you've held on to this, and you have not denied my name in the midst of all of the stuff that's going on in this city and some of the things that you're dealing with. All right? Now, the reference to the key of David, I think you can go back to Isaiah, and there's a chapter about the key of David being passed or taken away from someone because this person was not not operating out of a sense of good authority or rulership. But again, we understand that Jesus is going to bring forth a kingdom, right? He's the one who elevated David to the status of king. He's the one who holds the keys of Jerusalem, and therefore he is in control of this. He has the authority and the power, and he's the one who holds this before him. All right? Now, again, friends, I want us to go in and to look at that bottom line, if you will, and to realize that he says, you know what, church, here in Philadelphia, you have a little strength, yet you have kept my word and you have not denied my name. All right? So Jesus isn't necessarily calling this church weak, but he says, look, you have just enough faith or just enough strength that it allows you to remain dependent on me. All right? So how many times in our lives have we tried to operate on our own strength, thinking that we can go out and do things on our own and accomplish these things, right? Many of us try, and if you're like me, you try many, many times, and yet the lesson is always the same. Josh, you just can't do it on your own strength. Why do you continue to do things in vain, right? And so Jesus says, look, you've been doing good work. You're a church with a little bit of strength, just enough strength to do the work in the ministry that I've called you to do, but you have kept my word. You've held true to that, and you haven't denied my name. Okay? So friends, let us remember to utilize God's strength, to remain dependent on him regardless of our situation. One of the things that I will say, especially for us in the West and in this country specifically, is that oftentimes our wealth and our comfort can get in the way of us depending on God, right? Many of us do not know or even understand what it's like to have to depend on God for every single one of our needs, right? Most of us have enough wealth that we can go into the grocery store and we don't have to be too picky about the food that we're going to buy. We don't have to walk 3 to 5 miles just to get some muddy water that we might be able to bring back and drink. We don't worry and fret over where our next meal is going to come from. We don't go to bed at night worrying that we might not wake up the next day because our village or our home might be attacked in the night. Right? So friends, we need to remember and to be careful that we're to put and rest on God to meet our needs. And that can be a very difficult thing when we enjoy the wealth and the comfort that we have. Now, friends, I want us to take a moment and to look at that line that I have highlighted in blue, and it says, or Jesus here talks about being a God who opens up doors that no one can shut, and when he shuts doors, no one can open them up. And he says, see, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. Friends, I want to draw your attention to the very first word in that sentence, and it says see. Because it's very important that in order to walk through doors, we first have to understand that they're there, and we first have to see that they're open. Okay? Because guess what? If the door's not open, we're going to bang our head on the door trying to go through it when it's not there. All right? So we have to see the opportunity placed before us. And Jesus is saying, look, church in Philadelphia, I've opened a door for you that no one can shut. All right? Now again, friends, go back to the purpose of the city, because this is where the correlation comes in, right? The church or the city of Philadelphia was meant to be a missionary city to Asia Minor for the propagation of Greek culture and language. Here, Jesus is saying the same thing to the church, only he says, guess what, church? Your job is to go out and to evangelize. You're to go out and to spread my love and to spread the good news to the people. I'm giving you an open door to walk through, to go out to the nations and bring the good news. So that leads me to this next point. What doors has God opened and closed in your life? What doors has God opened and closed within the life of our church? Think about that for a moment. So let me share a practical example from my personal life. So if you've been around, I've shared part of my story, and many of you know that when I was in college, my dream, or what I thought my purpose in life was to go and to become a professor of history, right? But somewhere along the way, and I firmly believe this, and it took me a while to kind of accept this, God closed that door on that path for me. And friends, it took me a long time to figure out why. Because I sat there and it's like, God, I just spent 6 years of my life going to school so that I could get these degrees because I have this desire to go teach and to do stuff, right? And God closed that on me. And for a long time, I banged my head on that door trying to go through it, and it would not open back up. And finally, I surrendered that and said, okay, God, what is your purpose for that? What's the purpose for this? What am I going to do with this, with these degrees and this knowledge that I have if I'm not going to be in this setting? Well, several years later, God opened up a door and said, you know what, Josh, now it's time for you to become a pastor. And yes, not all of that knowledge and stuff that you've acquired is going to apply just strictly across the board and easily, but it's going to give you the foundation to go out and to do what the work in ministry that I'm going to call you to do, which is to go into the local church and to share my love with the people in that church. All right? Now, friends, again, I wasn't overly excited. I had to sit there and question, do I really have the courage to step through this door? Is that really what I want to do? The answer is yes, and I'm here today, and thank God that I took the opportunity to walk through that door because I've been unbelievably blessed to be here amongst you, to get to know you, to be in relationship with you, and to get to share God's love for you. And friends, I now see why God closed that other door, because had I walked through that door, I had realized that I had misprioritized a whole bunch of things in my life. And I had realized that I wasn't really interested in teaching people about history. I was more interested in the titles and the initials that were going to go behind my name because I thought they were an entrance or a way for me to gain power. All right? And so how good of a teacher would I have been if that was my aim? Right? And as I continue to reflect back on that, again, this is a very biased statement, but given sort of the state of academia right now, I question and hypothesize, what would the quality of my life be if I were a professor in a university right now? I have the feeling I would not be very happy with the things that were going around. And again, when you deal with a subject like history, for the few history majors that you get that enjoy ancient history, which was my specialty, it's not all that life-giving, right? But I get to stand before you guys and I get to proclaim a message that I believe is absolutely life-giving, something that can transform your individual lives, it can transform this church, and it can transform the community and world around us. And friends, I can find no deeper calling or sense of purpose than to do this thing right now. But it took God closing one door and me banging my head against it before I was able to go through and to reach this point where I was willing to walk obediently through this door. So friends, what about your life? What doors has God closed? Have you seen some of the chapters that have ended? Have you seen some of the struggles that you've run into because God has closed a door in your life? And how do you feel about that? Have you come to understand God's purposes, or are you resentful? Have you built things up because it feels like you're not able to move forward? What blessings have come from you being willing and obedient and walking through the new doors that have been put before you in your life? What about us as a church, right? What doors in our church have been closed? And friends, I'm going to say COVID threw a real wrench in our plans, right? It made us rethink and redo church in a way that we'd never done before. It caused us to have some serious discussions and say, look, we've been holding on and doing some of these things for so long, but there's really no life left in them. Maybe it's time that we let that go. Maybe God's closed the door on that specific ministry and we need to stop banging our head trying to keep moving forward with that thing. Now, I want to caveat this and say that doesn't mean that the ministry was wrong at the time we started it, right? It produced good things for the period that it was there. But maybe God has said, look, church, I'm closing this door because I have a new opportunity for you to walk through. And I need you to be willing to let that go and to walk through and do this new thing. So friends, think about some of the things that we've done. This church was willing to invest a large sum of money into a technology package, right? And just like the church at Philadelphia, will we perhaps walk through that door and say, look, we too have been given an open door to go and evangelize the world around us. And it might become a whole lot larger than just this small community of Bloomer. We now have the opportunity, if we're willing to put in the work, to reach people all over the world if that's what we would choose to do. So think about the doors that might be open. What doors might be open even within this community? Now, friends, I'm going to say this, and it's devastating to me, but many of us are many of us understand, or I don't even know if understand's the right word. Many of us know what happened in Texas over this past week, and I think about that school shooting. And it just breaks my heart to even comprehend that young, innocent children have to deal with that, you know. But friends, one of the things that I've been discussing with both of our churches is what does it look like for us to partner with the schools here in our communities? Because again, I just really firmly believe that God has sort of given me this image of the church surrounding the school, so to speak. And so what does it look like for us to get involved and partner with the schools? What does it look like for some of us to be willing to go in and volunteer and serve as mentors within our school? What does it look like for us to cultivate relationships with teachers and administrations and let them know that we have their back and that we're interested in caring and supporting them and interested in what's going on in our schools? What does it look like when we come and we go and sit at school board meetings and you know, say, look, maybe we're doing some things that are good or we're not doing some things. Let's work to fix some of these things. Or even just to go and support and say, look, we're here to support this because we value the school and we value our kids. And friends, if nothing else, what does it look like to pray for our school? Now, some of you may have known Clayton Peterson. He was a longtime member up in the New Auburn churches. He was kind of our local church hopper. Almost every Sunday he was at multiple services. But one of the things I just greatly admired about him is that even in his late age, he would ride his tricycle around town, and almost every day he would go and he would stop and sit in front of the school, and he would pray for the school every day. Now, friends, it's difficult. Some of us might be going, well, Josh, that's not really my passion. I'm not real good with working with kids. But here's the thing, friends. I've seen some really interesting posts come out of this event in Texas. And one of the most starking and I think challenging ones for me said, guess what, y'all? Jesus and prayers isn't going to solve incidents like these. And I think that's a really big challenge to our church, right? To say, I think we need to consider this. Now, I'm going to say I do believe the quote's misguided because I do believe prayer has a very important part to play, right? And yes, we see this one event that happened and say, well, why didn't God step down and intervene and prevent this thing from happening? But how many stories go untold where prayers literally did save it, where things didn't happen because people prayed, right? We don't hear about all of those stories. So friends, I do believe that prayer has power in this. But I think the challenge in the form is exactly right. That as Christians, we can't just sit and say, oh, we're going to send our prayers to the people of that community, or we're going to pray for these things so they don't happen, right? There needs to be some action to back up our prayers as well. And so, friends, again, what does it look like if God is opening that door for us, that we step in and say, look, we really do care about our schools. And yes, we're going to pray for our schools, but we're also going to be involved in making sure they're safe spaces, at least to the best degree that we can. So, friends, again, I ask you, what doors is God opening or shutting in your personal life? What doors is God opening and shutting in your church? And if you're here today visiting, I encourage you to consider those questions even in light of your own church, the churches that you attend regularly, because they're important questions. And you might have the opportunity to step in and into leadership or influence within some of those places. So let's continue on then, looking at some of the later verses. And here we see a shift, and Jesus says, I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews, though they are not, but are liars. I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you have kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. All right? So, again, friends, what we learn is that the church in Philadelphia is facing some kind of persecution. Okay? The scriptures don't tell us what kind of persecution it is. It tells us that there's this group, this group of Jews, or at least this group that claims to be Jews, but are not real Jews, that are causing problems. And again, we don't know if they're preventing the people from worshiping in the synagogues and sharing that space. We don't know if they're spreading rumors, trying to disqualify them for their Christian belief. But there's some level of hostility and conflict that's going on between this group in the church. And Jesus says, you know what? Guess what? Because you've held fast to me, because you understand that I am true and holy, and you've built your foundation upon me, eventually these people are going to come down and they're going to bow down at your feet, because through you they see me. And they're going to come and have a change of heart. They're going to recognize their error, and they're going to come down and they're going to eventually understand that I am the one and true God. All right, friends, if you go back through the scriptures, many times there's this same symbolism, and oftentimes it deals with the Israelites, right? And the Israelites are God's chosen people, and God time and time again says, look, if you'll be an obedient people, the Gentiles, the unbelievers, will eventually come down and bow down at your feet. Now, it doesn't, again, don't read into it that if you just believe in God, all your enemies are going to come bow down at your feet. It's not your feet that they're worshiping, okay? They're, because of you, because of the influence and the actions that they see, they're going to see Jesus through you, and they're going to have a conversion of heart. And these enemies that once caused you problems will now become friends and perhaps even allies to do things. All right? Now, again, there's a little bit here about the hour of trial, and friends, I have to say this is open to a little bit of interpretation, and I'm going to give you potentially two different interpretations of this, okay? Because Jesus says, you know what, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is going to come. And in order to understand what the hour of trial is, you need to go to the other end of the book of Revelations, and you need to read about the tribulation and some of the cataclysmic events that are going to happen there. All right? We don't have time to do that today, but let me give you these two interpretations. So one of them says that the church will remain through this period of tribulation, that God is not going to just come down and swoop the church out, but that the church is going to be left on earth, and the church is going to have to persevere through these difficult times, but God will keep them safe in doing it. Okay? So if that's your interpretation, that's a fine interpretation. The other interpretation says, guess what? God is literally going to come down and take the church, going to take believers out of the world before these events happen. And this time of tribulation is going to be a time where unbelievers are confronted with their unbelief, and they're going to have to make a choice. They're going to have to make a choice to follow God or to deny God. And there will be consequences for both of those things. But the church and believers will be taken out before any of that happens. Okay? Again, if that's your interpretation and your belief, that's a fine interpretation and belief. All right? But just so you understand what the hour of trial refers to. Okay? And this idea that, again, God will be coming, which leads to the next point. And he says, guess what, friends? I'm going to be coming soon. There's a sense of urgency here for the church that, look, I've given you this door to walk through, but there's some urgency through this. All right? You need to walk through that door. You need to go out and share the good news. You need to tell of my love to the people, to the nations around you, and you need to make disciples. You also need to hold on to what you have. You know, you're doing good work. You're grounded in my truth. You're doing the work that is supposed to take. And if you complete the race, I'm going to give you a crown of victory. All right? But here's the thing, friends. Don't falter now, because if you don't finish the race, I'm going to give the crown to somebody else. Or someone else will take the crown because they were willing to finish the race. All right? And if you finish the race, I'm not only going to give you a crown, but I'm also going to make you a pillar in my temple. Okay? Friends, what is the purpose of a pillar in architecture and building? Support, right? It bears a load, often a tremendous load, right? And so, again, think of what it means for us or for that church, but again, also us as individuals and as a church to be considered a pillar in the kingdom that God is building, right? And here there's imagery of the New Jerusalem, right? The New Jerusalem and the new temple coming down out of the heavens onto the earth. And this church gets to be one of the pillars of that temple. Now again, friends, one of the interesting things about pillars is that they're not supported by anything. They just rest and are built into the foundation, right? And so one of the things that I find so awe-inspiring by that is that even over the length of time, the decay of time, generally what we have left of some of the ancient structures are the pillars, right? The columns and pillars that still stand true because they're still cemented into the foundation. So friends, take for a moment and consider who's been a spiritual pillar in your life. For me, it was my grandma. For you, it might be someone else. Might be a family member, might be a neighbor, might be a teacher or a mentor. But friends, I think if we reflect back, we'll find we all have had people who have served as a spiritual pillar in our lives. And it's my hope that we too will be able to serve as a pillar in someone else's life. I hope I can be a pillar of strength for my family. I hope that I can be a pillar of strength here in the local church for each and every one of you. Friends, to go back to that scripture again, Jesus then goes on and says, look, not only am I going to make you a pillar, but I'm going to give you this new name. And I'm going to write this name upon you. And friends, what those names represent is that Jesus says, look, I've given you a special identity. You're one of mine. Okay? And that identity you need to be grounded in and understand that that's a part of your very being. All right? And friends, one of the things that I get concerned about in our Christian life today, and I'm going to finish with this, is that oftentimes we can use our Christianity as an add-on to all of the other things that we do. But friends, what does it look like to embrace that as our very being and saying, look, this is who I am. I'm a child of God first and foremost, and I do these other things. Right? Not I walk out that door and then I go do all these other things and maybe I put on my Christian identity. But to root ourselves and to place that as the foundation of our very being. And friends, finally, that also speaks to the intimate relationship that we have with Jesus, that Jesus gives us that special name. Jesus is the one who gives us that identity. So friends, some action steps for you this morning. What doors is God closing and opening in your personal life and in the life of the church? And I just realized that sentence doesn't make a whole lot of sense with in there. So, and then as a practical step, as you identify those doors that God has opened, I'm going to ask you to walk obediently and faithfully through those doors, to capture those opportunities that God has presented to each and every one of you. God bless.